Video games are a very interesting, powerful, and fairly new area of media to consider. Um, One of the really interesting things from a developmental sense is that they are arguably the best teaching tool we have, or the best technologically based teaching tool we have, in the sense that you are not only being exposed to situations and people and concepts the way you are with television or movies, but you're an active player in them. You actively drive the narrative, and you make decisions and choices and moves that will then change the direction of what's going on. What that means, of course, is this is essentially a virtual reality, that you are immersed in an environment with a set of conditions that you are asked by the gameplay to behave in certain ways. If you do it really well, you get rewarded. You also get more complicated and interesting narratives. If you do it badly, you get punished. So you are inside what psychologists call behavioral scripts. And behavioral scripts are how we learn anything. It's how we learn to say please and thank you. It's how we learn to please our parents and to do well in school. But if you're in an environment where, for example, you are learning how to play soccer well, it will help you learn soccer strategy. It won't help you kick a ball. It will help you think about how to play the game. If you're in a game where you're approaching the world over the barrel of a weapon and your job is to kill them before they kill you, you will get better at that. So it really is content driven with video games. The medium itself is neutral. We give the valence of good or bad or destructive to it. Unfortunately, the most popular video games, even among very young kids, are the ones that reward you for doing violence against others.
Ethical behavior is defined as acting in such a way that demonstrates consideration for others through respect, honesty, fairness, and humility. Most behaviors and manners are taught at an early age. According to the European mobile game market, there are more than 2.5 billion video games worldwide. A whopping 22% is made up of adolescents and teenagers aged 10 to 20 years old. This means that there are a staggering 550 million kids playing video games. It comes with no surprise then that many would agree that child behaviors are influenced by video games. The focus then lies within the questions of 1. Whether games do teach unethical behaviors, and 2. Should game developers be responsible for creating games that do teach ethical behaviors? The structure of this presentation will be as follows. Firstly, we will discuss top video games worldwide, what sorts of behaviors these games are showing. Secondly, we will review evidence from psychological studies that show that video games do not teach bad behavior. Thirdly, we will take into account the counterargument of people who do believe that video games teach poor behavior. Lastly, we will conclude this presentation as why video game developers are not responsible for the behavior of adolescents who play their games, and they should not be deemed accountable for making games that teach ethical behaviors. Let's take a look at the top 10 games worldwide. Placing number 2 on this list is Fortnite. Number 3, Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, and 5, the tactical shooter game Rainbow Six. Last but not least, at 10, we have PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Now, one may ask, what do all these games have in common? Well, all are first-person shooter games and involve acts of violence such as harm and killing. Since the top violent games all have to do with shooting, we will focus on global acts of mass shooting committed by adolescents and whether or not these types of video games had anything to do with these tragedies and whether or not there were any links. Since the United States leads the world in video game activity, we will use these countries as the focal point of our sample. Video games do not teach bad behavior. Why is this? Well, let's take a look at the United States. According to Psychology of Popular Media Culture, for every 5 households in the US with a male child, 4 of them own a video game system. And worldwide sales of video games are predicted to reach 102.9 billion in 2017. Now, why is this important? Well, in Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that California could not ban the sale of violent video games to minors because studies do not prove that violent video games cause minors to act aggressively. If judges ruled that violent video games cannot be banned because they do not cause minors to act aggressively, then there is no clear-cut connection between violent acts of shooting and video game playing. Let's take a look at why there is no link. In the very specific case of the Columbine shooting, where 2 teenagers carried out an atrocious act and killed 17 of their classmates, a study was conducted by the government to characterize the incident as well as to characterize the shooters, in order to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. Now, in their findings, individual attackers had experienced bullying and harassment that was, 1, long-standing and severe, and 2, in some of these cases, the experience of being bullied seemed to have a significant impact on the attacker and appeared to have been a factor in his decision to mount an attack at the school. According to NPR, easy access to guns, one of the biggest risk factors, then turns these fantasies into realities. Psychologists also say that these attacks can be prevented. They are often weeks or months in the planning. So, are video games really the culprit? We have deduced that psychological factors and ease of access to guns play a huge part in adolescents carrying out these attacks. Therefore, it's not video games that are causing these adolescents to act violently. Moreover, the government study of the mass shootings concluded that only 1/8 of the attackers exhibited an interest in violent video games. That's only 12%. Conclusion? If only 1/8 or 12% of all adolescents who carried out mass school shootings globally were interested in video games that showed violence, we can conclude that video games are not the cause of these violent acts. Let's take a look at the counter-argument. Many concerned parents would say that video games do teach unethical behaviors. In fact, a study done by Ohio State University showed that 90% of pediatricians and a whopping 60% of parents agreed or strongly agreed that violent video games can increase aggressive behavior among children. This is completely understandable, since the American Psychological Association did release their theory in 2015 that playing violent video games leads to more aggressive moods and behaviors. However, 230 scholars from universities across the globe published an open letter in 2013 calling APA, or American Psychological Association, stance on violent video games misleading and alarmist. As mentioned before, there are 550 million adolescents playing video games. These researchers emphasize that if video games were indeed the cause of bad behavior, there would be a much larger mass-scale link between violence and gameplay. Again, only 1/8 of adolescent shooters showed interest in video games. The majority of violent acts was carried out due to other factors such as psychological issues, bullying, and poor environment. So, in conclusion, games do not teach unethical behaviors, and game developers should not be responsible for creating games that do teach ethical behaviors. Thanks for joining me today. Again, my name is Zachary Garcia, and I hope you learned from my presentation.